National Australia Bank's profits are up, but CEO Ross McEwan warns on interest rates. Polls close in US midterm elections, and the Medibank hacker starts releasing Australians' personal medical information. It's Thursday, the 10th of November, 2022. Welcome to Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Adam Lang.
Good morning, Michael.
Adam, I suspect you know what I'm going to ask you, because yesterday morning I was very excited telling you that there was a new episode of our other podcast, How Do They Afford That?, which is with me and Canna Campbell, the founder of Sugar Mama TV. It's all about superannuation. You were heading off yesterday morning to go and have a listen. What did you think?
Well, Michael, you've made it very hard to pick. I know there's only 6 episodes to choose from so far, but each one of them is very good. And this one was a cracker. I think, too, it's tipped the favourite for me now because of just the topicality of superannuation. So I think this week, this episode, I think it's your best to date.
Oh, thank you. And you're right. It's such a big issue. And particularly for younger people, superannuation is the kind of thing that it just kind of happens in the background. But this episode is all about making sure that you don't just let it happen in the background. It is kind of take an active interest in it because it's your money and it is the key to a comfortable retirement, no matter how far that may seem to be away.
Yeah, I think the basic question is have a listen and consider how much would you like to have in your superannuation account when you finish, and kind of go from there.
Yeah. How Do They Afford That is the name of the podcast. You can find it wherever you listen to podcasts, and we'll also put a link in today's show notes. Now, Adam, you've got an interview coming up after this show today, and it is about a topic that is very, very relevant to anybody in business. You are speaking with Sean Wiles and Jason Ireland, who are partners at McGrath-Nicol Advisory. This is all about working capital.
Yeah, Michael, Sean and Jason are experts. So in their field, they get to work with lots of companies, some of them in distress, some of them going through change. And what they've observed through their data observations and reports is a change in working capital. 11 billion more is locked up in Australian businesses than it was last year in working capital. So basically, working capital is the oxygen by which companies breathe and live. So it's a really important measure to make sure that you can weather storms, carry on trading, and capitalise on opportunities too as they come up. It was a really good chat.
Yeah, it's a fascinating interview. McGrath-Nicol Advisory are great supporters of Fear and Greed. That interview is coming up a little bit later on, definitely worth sticking around for. But the main story this morning, Adam, National Australia Bank has posted an 8.3% lift in cash earnings to $7.1 billion and raised its dividend to 78 cents per share. But just like Westpac a few days ago, and we talked about this at the time, NAB has warned that the pace of interest rate rises over recent months is rapidly becoming a challenge for households.
Yeah, Michael, and interestingly, NAB's net interest margin, that's the difference between what it pays savers and charges borrowers, fell 6 basis points for the full year, partly because it bought the Australian consumer business of America's Citi during the year, but also because it's under competitive pressure in the home loans market. CEO Ross McEwan said the results for the 12 months to September are pleasing and that all divisions of the bank contributed to earnings. But he also says home loan growth will slow over the next year because higher interest rates are starting to make it harder for us all to pay our mortgages. Still, he says strong employment conditions and substantial household and business savings are a buffer, and they give him confidence in the resilience of NAB's customers and the broader economy in the months ahead.
Yeah, it's a really interesting insight, as we said the other day, into what is happening both in kind of households and in the business community. And we'll actually have a bit more of a look tomorrow, basically, on what are some of these key pointers that we can take from all of the bank results. Now, on the economy, NAB says consumption and growth will soften under the weight of higher interest rates and inflation. The bank forecasts GDP growth of just 1% for each of the next 2 years and an unemployment rate drifting higher to 4.5% by the end of 2024. Inflation will probably peak in the December quarter this year and then ease in 2023, it says. That means a peak cash rate of 3.6% in March next year. So all up, it's a broadly similar outlook to the one given by Westpac earlier in the week, and more evidence really that the economic outlook is on, I suppose you'd say, a pretty uncertain footing.
Yeah, Michael, it's good to see some consistency in the predictions. That gives us a good impression, I think, of where things are likely to head. But in the summaries, as you say, lower growth in GDP, higher inflation still persisting for longer than we want, interest rates thereby have to persist for longer than we want, and that unemployment rate will drift higher to 4.5% by the end of 2024.
Turning to local markets now, Adam, how about this? The S&P ASX 200 just failed to crack the 7,000 mark yesterday. Listen to how close this was. It closed at 6,999.3 points. That is a 0.6% increase. But God, that's close, isn't it?
It's like watching the odometer on your car reach one of those landmark kilometre readings. Nearly got there, but maybe tomorrow.
Which is very, very dangerous to try and watch that while you're on a highway, isn't it?
Yes, don't recommend it.
Absolutely not recommended. Now, on the local bourse, Orica led the way up after issuing a positive earnings outlook, rising just under 7%. Whitehaven Coal slumped 8.5% on the back of a profit warning. That was triggered by La Nina floods that really have affected access roads to its coal mines.
Interestingly, Michael, on the key subject of property, REA Group and Domain Holdings fell heavily after they each detailed a slowing outlook for the property market. REA finished 4.3% lower, Domain finished down 5.3%. REA parent News Corp also slumped heavily on the back of a 75% collapse in first quarter earnings. That's big. News Corp shares ended 11% down. A lot more on that later. It's a fascinating story. Meanwhile, silver and gold prices rose strongly as the US dollar backed off, sending the precious metals miners higher. Northern Star Resources lifted 6.8%, while Newcrest Mining rose 6.9%.
Yeah, gold is trading at a bit over $1,700 an ounce, and crude oil is a little bit under $89 a barrel. There's been a bit of movement in Bitcoin over the last few days as well, Adam, with the digital token now down around 13% or so in the last week. There is plenty going on. We'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Adam, as you mentioned earlier, Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation has suffered a 75% collapse in first quarter net income to $66 million. That is a big drop. Longtime CEO Robert Thomson says economic conditions are, quote, more volatile, and he blames the decline on foreign currency fluctuations and a decision by Amazon to reduce warehouse space, which cut News Corp's book sales. There's a few different operating divisions within Murdoch's empire. Book publishing, which is kind of headed by the HarperCollins business, which was one of the big five publishers, saw a 54% decline in revenue to $39 million. And that's the bit that Robert Thomson was blaming Amazon for.
That's true, Michael, but the results were not much better elsewhere. News Media, which is the division that owns the news mastheads, The Australian, The Herald Sun, Daily Telegraph and London's Times, saw a revenue fall of 47% to US 18 million. Subscription video services, essentially Foxtel, KO and Binge, saw revenue fall 3% to US 111 million. Overall, news said advertising revenue fell 50%, while digital subscriptions rose only 9%. So you look at all those numbers and what does it say? News Corp is a bit of a gauge on how the economy is doing because its businesses rely on consumer and business confidence. So it does tell us something about the overall global economy, and those signs say it's a bit weaker.
And also, Adam, News Corp's quarterlies mean we also get results from its part-owned subsidiary REA Group. And there's a bit of a warning in there as well on slowing residential property markets and a worse than expected spring selling season. REA is, of course, the company behind property listings leader realestate.com.au. It says national residential for sale listings in October were down 18% on last year. Sydney's down 31%. Melbourne is down 29%. CEO Owen Wilson says that's partly because there was a rush last year as lockdowns ended, but he also added that the heat has come out of the property market in recent months and he expects that to continue now as interest rates rise.
Michael, sometimes we talk about property as a spectator sport in this country, and I know News is a media company. Do you ever think there'll ever be a sports rights negotiation style for property coverage?
There could well, but well, you know what? Really, it is one of like the last great sporting events is going along to auctions. Really, isn't
Yeah.
it?
Like Damien Cooley, what's he doing this weekend?
Indeed, and it's entirely free to wander in there. The only risk is that you may end up accidentally buying a house.
One day, maybe one day.
You're always kind of wary when you go to auctions of just not putting your hand up accidentally.
Don't scratch your nose.
I don't know whether you do this too, but if I'm at an auction and I'm not there to bid, pretty much cross my arms and just hold my hands in tight, even though I know the logic behind it is completely flawed because you need to be registered as a bidder, you need to have your paddle with your number and everything.
You want to be part of the competition.
I'm just itching. I'm a very competitive person and I love to win. And an auction is something that you can actually win if you've got the money. I don't, unfortunately.
All right. While we consider the future path of sports rights and auctions, we also heard from REA Group's competitor Domain, which had an annual general meeting yesterday. Domain told shareholders it expects earnings to fall because market conditions are worsening, particularly in the inner cities. CEO Jason Pellegrino says there was a noticeable deterioration since September. It's been well flagged that the housing market is softening, but still, both companies' shares took a hit yesterday.
Yeah, they sure did. Now, Adam, the Medibank hackers have started to release personal medical data on the internet. Information released so far includes details of drug addictions and HIV diagnoses, alongside treatments for anxiety, constipation, and reflux. This is the most personal data that you could imagine that's being put out online. Somewhat bizarrely, right? The hackers have split the data into what they called naughty and nice lists, putting, for example, drug and alcohol abuse on one side and listing people with cataracts and colitis and that kind of thing on the other. Bizarre.
This is galling, isn't it?
Yeah, it really, that's a good word for it, actually. It is. It really is galling.
You know, I'm fortunate enough not to be one of the people involved in this data leak, but I'm offended on everyone's behalf. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese confirmed that he too is a Medibank customer, and New South Wales Greens Senator David Shoebridge says he has had personal data released by the criminals. So you can see this is affecting so many people and many that inevitably we will know. Cybersecurity Minister Claire O'Neill says only a small number of Medibank customers have had their medical information compromised so far, but the numbers are expected to grow. She called the hackers the lowest of the low and said, "I cannot articulate the disgust I have for the scumbags who are at the heart of this criminal act." End of quote. I agree.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. And it is so disturbing. At the same time, Claire O'Neill is really establishing herself as one with a flair for a fantastic quote, isn't she?
Oh, yeah, really firm voice, a great sort of disposition, I think. But also, as you say, some really punchy lines.
Moving on now, and supermarket giant Coles held its annual general meeting yesterday amid revelations that all those plastic bags being collected in the big bins outside at stores are not actually making it to the recycling. It turns out hundreds of millions of plastic bags that have been dropped off for recycling are instead in storage at a company called RedCycle, which has now announced that it is suspending the collection program.
Michael, I use this program all the time.
Same.
So I'm worried too now. Coles boss Stephen Kane said he is disappointed to hear the bags aren't being recycled and intends to work with Woolworths, which was also affected, to find a better way to recycle soft plastics. Kane also told shareholders he's optimistic about the coming Christmas and said new automation facilities that use artificial intelligence and robots to restock stores will make 2023 one of the most transformational years in the group's 100-plus year history.
Oh, that sounds pretty exciting. That seems like a very big leap from 2022 to 2023, doesn't it?
Doesn't it?
To go from very few robots in store to suddenly next year, robots in your local Coles.
Yeah, and those jobs in shelf packing, that are often overnight or late into the evening, early morning, they may be affected too.
Yeah. Look, I'm excited about that. That sounds like a very kind of grand statement about it being one of the most transformational years. But Hey, it's got my interest.
Let's see if they deliver.
Indeed. Now, I mentioned this one before. Orica has told shareholders to expect stronger earnings in 2023 despite higher energy costs and inflation after posting higher earnings for the year to September 30.
Yeah, Michael, Orica makes explosives that are used in mining, and higher commodity prices are behind its 36% rise in operating earnings to $579 million. Pretty good result. It says inflation, higher energy costs, and global supply chain problems will be a challenge in 2023, but supportive commodity prices means its earnings will continue to rise.
And another one that we mentioned earlier, but it's worth a closer look. Whitehaven Coal issued a profit warning saying the cost of shipping a ton of its coal to Newcastle Port this year would be double what it was a few years ago. Whitehaven blames La Nina for the 7% lift in unit costs because flooding is affecting access roads, as I mentioned before, and that has cut production and sales volumes by between 5 and 7%.
Whitehaven says it's been transporting people to its mine sites via helicopter to help overcome the flood-hit roads. This is the same company that only a few months back was celebrating a profit result 5 times higher than the prior year because of sky-high coal prices.
And finally, Adam, how about this one? There is a chance that Prime Minister Anthony Albanese might have a face-to-face with Chinese President Xi Jinping in what could be a watershed, really, for Australian-Chinese relations.
This is a really interesting prospect. Albo says nothing is finalised, but any meeting would be a positive thing. If it does happen, the meeting will take place on the sidelines of either the G20 Leaders Summit in Bali or the APEC Summit in Bangkok, both of which are coming up shortly. The last formal meeting between President Xi and an Australian Prime Minister was with Malcolm Turnbull back in 2016, and you'd have to say relations have probably deteriorated ever since.
Ooh, what do we say? I think that's a fairly safe statement, don't you think?
Yeah, trade, tariffs, sanctions, yeah, I reckon it is.
Yep, security situation in the region. I'd say it's it's almost a different world.
Yeah.
In the 6 years between that last meeting and now, it is entirely different on every front.
It absolutely is. So let's hope this meeting can happen. It would have to lead to something better.
Did you like how grand my statement was then? It feels like today's the day for grand statements when you've got kind of the boss of Coles making grand statements. I wanted to make one too.
Well, you win. You did it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, moving on to overseas news now. Adam, Disney is cutting marketing and content spending after weaker than expected fourth quarter earnings at Disney Plus, which is the subscription streaming service that's going head to head with Netflix. Disney Plus, how about this, has lost a staggering $8 billion since its launch 3 years ago, and $1.5 billion in the last quarter alone. But it's gaining subscribers at a rate of knots. In the 3 months ended October 1, Disney Plus added 12.1 million net new accounts, beating analyst predictions and bringing its global total to 164.2 million subscribers. That is a lot of people.
Yeah, these are enormous numbers. And we found out this week that 19.3% of Australians have a Disney Plus subscription. That's a number that trails the 48% of us that subscribe to Netflix. Disney said it was at peak losses in streaming and things would start to look better from now on. It's an interesting balancing act for a company which is sinking money into content to build streaming subscribers. Its famous theme parks division set an all-time record with $7.4 billion in revenue, and that was up 36% from last year. Overall, Disney shares fell 7% and are down 36% since the start of the year.
Now, Adam, counting in the US midterm elections is underway. As the name suggests, midterms are held halfway through a presidential term and put control of both houses of parliament up for grabs. The big policy issues this time were really around inflation, crime, and abortion rights.
And Michael, it's not just control of Congress that's at stake. In many states, governors, mayors, and even jobs like the local attorney general are up for grabs in these elections. There's a whole raft of local ballot measures being voted on. A bunch of states, including Arkansas, Missouri, and Maryland, are voting on whether to legalise marijuana. California is voting on a measure to guarantee abortion rights. Kentucky is taking the opposite approach and asking voters to confirm its state's constitution does not allow abortions.
It is a big, big few days for the US. And obviously, this has a very large flow-on effect to financial markets and to business in the States and well, right around the world then. Adam, to wrap up today, would you like a little Elon Musk update?
Oh, I would. I'd miss it if we didn't have it.
Well, Elon Musk has sold almost $4 billion worth of Tesla stock in the days since he bought Twitter. I mean, that wasn't actually that long ago, but he has sold $4 billion worth of Tesla since then. All up this year, Musk has sold $19 billion worth of shares in Tesla. Now, don't forget, he said in April and then repeated again in August that he wasn't a seller. Tesla shares have halved over the past year.
He just keeps us guessing, doesn't he?
He does. He's a fascinating individual. It is pure theatre. It's a one-man show.
Let's see what he does tomorrow.
Indeed. All right, up next is the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. And today, Adam, you're speaking with Jason Ireland and Sean Wiles from McGrath-Nicol Advisory, all about working capital.
Yeah, Michael, as you mentioned at the top of the show, McGrath-Nicol Advisory are supporters of ours, and we've had them on before. Jason and Sean are really good speakers. They're both partners at McGrath-Nicol Advisory. They get great data, and they've done a report into working capital. How much more is tied up in working capital in the last 12 months? And again, think of working capital like the oxygen that companies breathe to stay alive. You know, this is the cash that they can use to keep going as a business, to weather storms and to plan ahead.
It's a very, very good way to look at it. A very good illustration of it. It is coming up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. And don't forget to check out the latest episode of How Do They Afford That, which is available now wherever you listen to podcasts. Be like Adam and listen to that today.
Yeah, Michael, be like me and listen.
That's right. Very, very good advice. Thank you very much, Adam.
Thank you, Michael.
It's Thursday, the 10th of November, 2022. Make sure you're following the podcast and join us online on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.